Hello and welcome to another episode of Immigration and Mobility Decoded. I am one of your hosts, Eric Prado, and joining me as always is my co-host Cecily Petrie. Cecily, how's it going?
Everything's great. We're excited. It's summer. We're kind of back in the swing of things with, I just moved, so I'm kind of getting my home office set up and all of that fun stuff in the hot summer temperatures. So, I picked a great time to move.
Summer is always great, and moving in the summer is always a blast. What's been your biggest any big challenges or favorite things about moving?
I would say I've had a few furniture delivery hiccups, so that's to be expected. We've had, some tables arriving with no tops. We've had a sofa not fitting through the turn of the staircase. We've run the gamut of having our fair share of little hiccups, but that's all part of it. So I really can't complain. It's been quite smooth.
Yeah, as long as nothing hopefully doesn't arrive broken or shattered from moving
Yeah.
from the old place to
Yeah,
the
we
new
had no
place.
broken things in the move over, so I'm also impressed by that. So I,
There we
I really
go. There we
can't
go.
complain. How's your summer been so far?
Summer's going by pretty fast. There are a lot of awesome things going on. Personal life, but then also here at Envoy Global. If you're listening, we did recently welcome a new CEO, Jason Brennan. So we're very excited to be working with him, and he's still getting a little bit settled in. I think he's in week number 3 as we record this intro. But we're hoping to get him on the show for a future episode, hopefully sometime, in the near future, in the late summer or early fall. But yeah, no, summer's going good. We got 1 month left before we hit that awesome fall season. But Cecily, speaking of summer, I know you do a lot of traveling, kind of going to some industry events, both large and small. So I was wondering if you can, maybe relay some tidbits or things that you're hearing from recent events that you've been to. We're kind of at this a little bit over the halfway point of the year, so I'm just curious what insights you might be able to share.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been to Austin, New Jersey, and New York this summer. So really kind of touching into different markets in the space. And I think primarily, one of the big things we're talking about is obviously travel. So that's been something that's top of mind for a lot of individuals managing immigration programs and kind of erring on the side of caution in terms of overall travel. One theme for an event that we talked about was just kind of mental health in the immigration space. So I thought that was really beneficial and kind of just a reminder of, you're seeing a lot of pressure with immigration in the news and how people are reacting to headlines and what that looks like. So basically, some of those topics we're taking a step back and how you can really help the team that you're managing understand what the employees might be going through from an immigration standpoint, but also how you can offer different resources for sponsored employees who are going through the process and adding in some of that anxiety that we're seeing there. So I think that was a great overarching theme and reminder for us all with immigration being such a hot topic in the news. And Eric, I know that leads you into, you had a few topics that you wanted to cover, or one specific of immigration in the news.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate those insights, Cecily. I think we could maybe even do an episode where you're the guest and you can share some of those insights in the future. No, but as you mentioned, there are definitely a lot of policy changes and things happening in the U.S. immigration system, as you mentioned. The things that we're seeing in the news, but then there are the things that we maybe are not seeing in the news, and that's because they're more on the corporate side, corporate immigration side, so affecting the non-immigrant visas and some of those programs. And one particular update that I wanted to share, and we did a write up on this on envoyglobal.com. But Cecily, as you know, back at the start of the month of July 2025, the One Big Beautiful Act, as it's officially known, was signed into law by President Trump. Um, that's a giant bill, but within that bill, there are some things, and in particular, one thing that impacts corporate immigration, and that is there will be several new fees for a variety of immigration cases, and an increased fees for some filings. These new fees will be subject to an annual inflation adjustment beginning in the fiscal year 2026, and they will be set to a statutory minimum amount that may be increased um, by the Secretary of Homeland Security. So I'll just, I highly recommend going to envoyglobal.com to read the full write up. But this is known as the visa integrity fee, and it will, according to the law, apply to all non-immigrant visa categories that require visa issuance for travel into the U.S. So this would include for the F visa category, the H visa category, the L's, TNs, etc. And the fee is to be paid upon issuance of a non-immigrant visa. Um, According to our write up, the minimum amount is set to $250. And as I mentioned just a few seconds ago, it is subject to future increases according to inflation. So, yeah, then there was also an update to the I-94 fee, an update to the ESTA fee, the Electronic System for Travel Authorization, and some other immigration fee changes. So we'll link the write up to this news alert in the show notes or description. And if you have any questions, definitely head to envoyglobal.com. And definitely encourage you to read this update. But I think, Cecily, the reason why I wanted to bring up this particular update, obviously there's a lot more, but in particular this one is, it's kind of like segues in a way to our conversation with Arif Khimani from MobSquad, in that it kind of shows, if you will, some similarities and differences within the U.S. and Canadian immigration systems, and kind of some of the ways both countries are setting up their systems, or modifying their systems, if you will, to kind of meet their goals when it comes to welcoming immigrants and sponsored employees. But Cecily, I'm kind of handing it off to you. I'm curious to hear your initial thoughts about our conversation with Arf, and anything else that you'd want our audience a little bit of sneak preview before we dive into the full conversation we had with them.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I'll start with giving a little bit of kind of a snapshot of Mob Squad as a company. Arf does a great job, highlighting what Mob Squad does. But I think as a teaser, I'll give a little highlight reel on that. But Mob Squad, basically, they have unfettered access to top tier global technology talent, which it relocates to Canada to provide technical and consulting services to both Canadian and US clients. So Mob Squad ensures technology professionals facing any US work challenges can provide the technical and consulting services to North America companies all from Canada. So just kind of giving that overview of Mob Squad to preface our conversation with ARF. A couple of the key topics that we discussed in the conversation were potential upcoming changes to the Canadian government, Canada's strategic importance as a tech hub, and really how that's evolved over time. I think that's a really interesting piece of the conversation. And then we also discussed the H-1B lottery success rate in the US and how the success rate puts a focus on the Canadian alternative. Those were a few of the highlights from my side. But Eric, anything you would add from our conversation?
No, I think that's a pretty good snapshot. I always enjoy speaking with Arf. He's very knowledgeable about the Canadian immigration system, and it's his organization Mob Squad. Just hearing the work that they do to help U.S. employers, but also other employers, still hire and be able to train and nurture the talent into their organizations, um, is pretty insightful. I also think it's pretty cool, and everyone will hear it shortly. Just we did spend a good amount of time talking about the increase and how Canada as a country is approaching the boom in AI technologies, and so the government there is definitely aware and making a play to ensure that they're able to welcome foreign talent, sponsor talent, high skill talent into the country to help organizations that are based in Canada or perhaps utilizing offices in Canada to advance their AI technologies. So yeah.
That's great. Yeah, I appreciate adding in the AI topic. I think obviously that's something that we're going to continue to see in the industry, and how that plays a role in immigration and mobility. One quick kind of reminder for everyone listening ahead of our conversation with Arf is we would greatly appreciate if you could subscribe. So if you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, it would be great for you to hit the subscribe button so you get alerted to all of our new episodes when they are released. And now here's our episode with Mob Squad CEO Arf.
And now, Immigration and Mobility Decoded would like to welcome Arif Khimani, the President and Chief Operating Officer at MobSquad. Arif, Cecily, and I are very excited to chat with you today. You officially have joined the two-time guest club. You were, I should say, guest number 2 way back in the day when we first launched this podcast video format. So very excited to have you back on the show.
Awesome. Happy to be here again. I didn't know it was the second guest. That's great.
Yeah, yeah. So Arf, you've been with Mob Squad for quite a while. Just kind of jump straight into it. Just want to learn more about your background and what led you to your current role at Mob Squad.
Yeah, absolutely. So I graduated from UBC up in Vancouver and spent the first part of my career at Procter and Gamble in Toronto, and then was back in Vancouver working for Amazon. And someone I'd known for a long time, Irfan Raji, who's the original founder of Mob Squad, reached out with the idea for the company. And given what I had been observing with Amazon around how they were building technical teams, how they were expanding rapidly in Canada, and finding amazing technology talent both in Canada and bringing people here, I thought the potential of Mob Squad made a ton of sense. So fortunately, kind of put my hand up and said I'd be interested in learning more. And after we were talking for a little bit, it just made a lot of sense. At least on my end, to join. And luckily there was a position available at the very, very early stage. So kind of joined when we were pre-revenue, still thinking about the idea, and built it, helped build it to where it is today.
Definitely, yeah. I've been with Envoy Global for coming up on 7 years, and for as long as I've been here, we've always had a really good relationship with Mob Squad, and it's been really awesome seeing you guys grow over the years. And part of that growth is, as you alluded to, your unique model supporting tech talent. So kind of going into that a little bit more, what inspired that mission, and how has it evolved over the years?
Yeah, no, of course. I mean, just looking at the market in general, we observed a couple of things. So one is just that companies across North America were struggling desperately to access technology teams. And it was just challenging to find in a variety of areas, including software engineering, AI and machine learning, data science, cybersecurity, many, many others. And we were just observing this across the market where companies actually had really, really good funding. They had great teams. They had strong VC backers. And the thing that was limiting their growth was access to the right amount of technology teams and technology talent. And then we combine this with our knowledge of Canada, noticing that there was a technology talent shortage in Canada, but a lot of the world's best talent viewed Canada favorably and wanted to be here. And there were policies in place specifically to help bring technology talent to Canada for eligible employers, which we'll get into in a little bit. But the environment was just very favorable to bring the best and brightest here, along with companies that needed support from amazing technology teams. And so when you combine those two things, it really inspired both the original idea for MobSquad, but also how it has evolved. Um, and somehow it has evolved. Like it's very similar in some ways to the beginning. The things that have changed is just the needs of clients always adapts, right? So this is no surprise to anyone who's been paying attention for the last few years, but AI and ML have grown tremendously, right? And so and cybersecurity has grown tremendously as well. So as you know, as we've seen threats from both foreign actors in terms of countries, but also just individual uh, actors, it's created these desperate needs for cybersecurity and AI and ML. And so it changes really what companies are looking for in terms of the types of people and types of support that they need. But by and large, the model is similar.
Kind of going on that vein of, seeing that evolution, what trends are you seeing or have you seen in the global tech talent mobility space?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I think there's been a large shift post COVID, a lot of which has stayed. So, Mob Squad started in 2018. And a lot of the conversations we were having with companies in the US, especially in San Francisco and New York, is they were building their startup teams and they wanted everybody that was working with them in any capacity, whether directly or indirectly, to be um, with them in those cities. So it was like, I want my whole team in New York. I want my whole team in San Francisco, especially in the early days. COVID really changed that in terms of the global tech market. Companies were just much more comfortable with having people in different locations. And especially since people were not going into the office, for health reasons at the time, it opened up people's minds to having support much more broadly. And, in a narrow sense, it was, I'm happy to have teams support me from other states. So, markets like Denver and Austin and other places that weren't traditionally massive tech hubs became much bigger hubs for talent. But it also opened the door for nearshore opportunities in places like Canada. Um, where companies were a lot more willing to have support from other places that weren't necessarily your traditional offshore markets like in India or Bangladesh or something like that. They were looking at nearshore options because they just offered a different type of service essentially. And I think having said all of that, a lot of the world's best talent still wants to come to North America. So there's top salaries here. The benefits are good here for people and their families. There's amazing career progression, and really importantly, exposure to kind of core teams. And then there's just interaction with like-minded individuals. So if you're building something in a North America-based team, it's very, very helpful to be on the ground when you're doing that. But since getting into the U.S. remains challenging, just with the visa caps and the number of people that are admitted in any given year, Canada has presented a really, really good alternative, and I feel like that has grown in popularity over the years.
So, Arf, you mentioned, post COVID, a lot has changed, both, immigrant and just in general, right? Including the Canadian government. And I think part of this conversation, right, when discussing the country's various immigration pathways and tapping into that tech talent, eventually ladders up to the government in place. And obviously, you guys had a recent election, liberal, still controls the government, controls parliament, and Mark Carney took over for Justin Trudeau. So I guess maybe from a very high level recap, what can we expect from Canada's new prime minister and his government in relation to immigration?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think to back up a little bit, there are two immigration policies that have made it much more streamlined for companies in Canada, eligible companies in Canada, to hire talent. And we probably talked about these in the original podcast, so I won't go into too much detail, but I think they're helpful just for context. So one is the global talent stream. This offers an expedited labor market impact assessment process and work permit process, where the headline really is, instead of a work permit taking 6 to 8 months to get approved, it can be approved in as little as 4 weeks, often taking approximately 6 to 8 weeks. So still very, very quick. And this is really for most technology talent working for eligible companies in Canada, being able to obtain work permits from anywhere in the world. The second stream here is express entry or provincial nomination permanent residency stream. So it's the Canadian equivalent of a green card. That allows people to become permanent residents in Canada in about a year. That can vary. It can be as short as 6 months, as long as 18 to 24. But in about a year, most folks can obtain their permanent residency. There's no country caps. It's a points-based system where you get points for your age, language skill, education, and work experience. And provinces like Alberta and BC can prioritize certain industries, including technology. So the reason I mentioned that is under the new prime minister, there is still a goal to keep those programs in place. They are specifically mentioned as priority programs. And because there is still a need to expedite work permits and permanent residency for those that are deemed to be adding a ton of value to the country, and technology workers falls within that group. So I think we would expect that those programs will continue. I think the thing that we have seen with the new government is actually a continuation of commitments made by the Trudeau administration, which was around reducing the overall numbers of immigration in Canada to sustainable levels. We saw that in the Carney Liberal platform, and we saw that mentioned across debates and interviews as well. The goal really here is to bring temporary workers in Canada and international students down from 7.3% to 5% by the end of 2027. So it's a gradual kind of reduction of the number of temporary residents in the country. Most of this was focused on students and on lower wage work, but it does impact the overall, targets for the country. And I think there were reductions as well to the permanent residence targets that fell by about 15 or 20%, depending on the year and the grouping of that. Um, the other thing that I think was important here is that the global talent stream was mentioned within the new platform, and it's quoted to say that it will help high growth Canadian businesses and entrepreneurs with new projects to support Canada's strategic growth. And then the piece that I think is important is that this includes attracting highly skilled talent from the United States who can help grow the economy in Canada. So that sounds very familiar for anyone that's been following this over the last few years. I think there's just been a bit of a right sizing of the total numbers, really just so that Canada can sustainably intake people at a level that makes sense.
Yeah, I was about to add, or it pops into my head, the reduction. I feel that is a reversal of that stretch of time from like 2017 to 2021, perhaps, where their immigration levels plan was always increasing, but now it's reversed.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, I think, yeah, we've definitely seen that happen. We've seen kind of increases to record levels every year for a series of years, and that has come down. There's been a lot of discussion around what this means and what it's trying to do. I think by and large, the thesis here is that Canada still wants the very best and brightest, high skill, high wage, immigration in priority sectors like tech, like healthcare, like education. But there's been a reduction to the overall numbers, really, so that things like housing, infrastructure, education, healthcare can catch up with, the intake of people, right? So that we can continue to deliver amazing things along all of those lines for those that are already in Canada, but also those that are coming to Canada, because we want Canada to remain an attractive place for people who want to come here. And if you arrive and you're not able to access all the things that I mentioned earlier around health and infrastructure and housing, that creates a bit of a problem, right? And so this, I think, is really just an opportunity to reset that a little bit while still intaking those that are going to add a ton of value. Um, and I think there's a couple myths within the numbers, or at least when you double click down into it a little more, like some things that are important. If you look at where the reductions were, like they were very much in the low wage work streams as well as students. So, as an example, the cut to total temporary foreign worker intake for this year was 16%. If you look at the cut to students, though, students were at 682,000 in 2023, and that is down to 306,000 in 2025. So, over 50%. There's similar numbers that are true for when you look at some of the lower wage streams. And so there's been a prioritization on who Canada is going to admit. And students were one of the largest cuts, and lower wage work were one of the other largest cuts.
Yeah, so I mean, speaking of students, do you get the sense that that I guess the government will I guess essentially stick to that? I guess here in the states, we've been seeing um, a stance from the current administration regarding international students. So I'm wondering if perhaps there is a potential a play for the government to tap into that talent. But yeah, just curious what your thoughts on that are.
No, I think they will stick to this, and I think getting into the nuance of why this happened, there were a lot of institutions that opened as the intake numbers were going up that were you would not consider like a traditional university. They were really designed for international students to be able to get student visas and then get a postgraduate work permit similar to an OPT in the US, and then be able to get their PR. And they knew that they had tremendous value in being able to provide this because once you have that degree, you can get yourself on track for PR. And so their intake was 90% plus international students, and they were charging exorbitant fees for these schools. And so this was really, really targeted at reducing or eliminating some of those schools from being able to do that. I think a lot of the higher education institutions that you might know in Canada, like University of Toronto, University of British Columbia, University of Alberta, they're all still able to intake international students, and some of them at a very similar level to before. They were really just trying to weed out some of which was frankly fraud, and others that were just not really the intent of the programs.
I mean, that's great to hear, right? Combating fraud and I guess punishing out those bad actors, if you will. Um, so I guess similarly, what have you heard, or what are your sentiments, if you will? We're going to touch on the H-1B particular in just a moment, but obviously with some geopolitical uncertainties in between the U.S. and Canada in recent months, what's your sense of how the government, your government, the Canadian government, if you will, is taking immigration into account, and what might some of their strategic moves might be looking forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think the strategies by and large remain fairly similar. I think that there, is still a goal to like Canada has not turned off its immigration, and that's I think something I definitely want to make sure people understand who are listening. Like even if you look at where the cuts were, the permanent residence cuts were taking us to levels that are still above the pre-pandemic intake. So, as an example, the 2025 permanent residence target for economic immigration was announced as 232,000 people. That number was 197,000 in 2019. So it's still substantially higher than in 2019. We started MobSquad in 2018 when the numbers were in that 197 range. And it was already, all the headlines then were Canada is open for business. Canada wants to bring in the best and brightest. So even with these reductions, we're still actually above those numbers. So there's still plenty of, space for those that are, um, interested in being here. I would say the strategy of Canada is largely the same in wanting to bring in the best and brightest. I would say there's just been more focus on what that really means. So if you look at who they've been selecting for permanent residency, it's been in a few categories. So one is people that are already in Canada have a massive advantage now. So if you were working in Canada on a work permit, they're doing draws for what they're calling the Canadian Experience class, which only allows people with at least 1 year of Canadian work experience to get selected. And the thesis there is that you've already been here, you've already worked here. It makes sense to convert you into a permanent resident if you're interested in that because you've already contributing to the economy, and we want to make sure that can happen long term. Other priority sectors, we've seen draws that are specific for healthcare and specific for education because these are sectors that have shortages of workers. And so being able to choose permanent residents in sectors that have those shortages allows us to more, hone in on those that are more needed. And tech continues to remain a priority, right? The global skills strategy, the global talent stream continues to operate. It continued to be mentioned in the Liberal platform. It continues to be, a very active program. Um, I would say the main change with that program is just again, there's been a lot of scrutiny on users of the program to weed out fraud again. So it's just like making sure that employers that are making offers are eligible. They've been operating in Canada for a long time. They have a track record. They're offering real, employment offers to people. And so I would say, it is more difficult to get approved for things because they're just doing a lot more scrutiny on the applications. But if you are an eligible company and meet all the conditions, then it's still, a very viable stream.
Final question for me. Then I'm going to turn it over to Cecily. Probably should have asked this earlier because you mentioned it, and I totally forgot to ask it. But you mentioned, just the rise of artificial intelligence, AI, and it just keeps growing, growing, growing. Uh, how is Canada, tapping into that particular space through various means, and particularly the talent that they want to welcome into the country?
Yeah, I mean, it's great timing for that question. There was a lot of questions on this recently that some of the ministers now in charge of this have been answering. I think Canada is, if not already, becoming very bullish on AI, as you would expect. There were actually specific call outs to moving from a mentality of restriction and regulation into an environment of trying to do as much as we can here. This includes funding initiatives. So there are federal programs that are funding um, data centers and AI initiatives across the country so that there's more funding and positions and companies available to access that. I think this includes talent. So there will be a push to bring in the best and brightest, as well as train the best and brightest through our universities. So both local training as well as bringing in those who are experts. And there are a number of successful companies in Canada that were name checked and highlighted by the government, including Cohere, that are Canadian born and bred companies that have grown here. And I think the idea is we obviously want to preserve those companies, but we want to find the next 10 of those to succeed in Canada. So I think that there's a lot of appetite, definitely at the corporate level, but also at the government level to really be a winner in the AI space. And I think we want to have, there's probably like-minded countries like the US that want to be leaders in this space so that we have the best talent, the best technology, and the best companies that are building this going forward. And there's definitely alignment, I think, across multiple levels of government and definitely the corporate side on this.
Traveling into what you're saying about wanting to be kind of a winner in the AI space, and how we've seen Canada be a player specifically there. We've seen, Canada's strategic importance as a hub for businesses, and that's really evolved over time with trade agreements, a booming tech sector, and a focus on various industries. Why do companies view Canada as such a strategic hub?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are just a lot of advantages in Canada, especially for US based companies. We share a very long border and have shared, decades of harmonious trade and relations. And, even with some, we can call them hiccups for now, I think that things are, by and large, still really, really good. And I think that there are some advantages that are specific to Canada that might stand out versus other places, especially for U.S. businesses or U.S. individuals who are thinking about partner countries. And one of those I think that is really important is that Canada has really really strong IP protection laws that are similar to those in the U.S. And this we have found is really important in the companies and clients that we talk to. Right, like they may not trust important parts of their code base or certain things that they work on with certain overseas or offshore teams just because they are not able to enforce their IP protection. And if they basically upload a lot of their things up elsewhere and there's a replica company that pops up the next day, they don't have a lot of recourse for that. Whereas Canada does. And in this world where, all of your value is in these intangible assets and in these IP assets, it's not like you have tangible goods that, you have or that to protect, so losing that value is tremendously protecting that value is tremendously important, and you can't really risk losing it. And because Canada has these strong IP enforcement guarantees that line up very similar to the US, I think it makes it an attractive market, especially in a world of technology companies. I think there are obvious ones, like we have really similar time zones and business culture congruency to the US. So it's really seamless and easy to do work between our countries. We have all of our major cities kind of line up with US time zones. So that definitely helps. And I think an important one is just that Canada is very attractive for talent. So part of what we discussed earlier, part of it is policy driven. Obviously, that there is immigration policy that people look at and they see that it's stable. It offers a clear and direct path. It doesn't have country caps, so it doesn't matter whether you're coming from any country. You have the same chances of being admitted based on your skill set and your experience. And then there are just the attractiveness of being in Canada, the lifestyle, safety, education, healthcare. People really want to be here, especially people with families, because it's a really really good place for people to expand their careers and know that there's stability for their family. And in this world, I mean, the access to talent is the access to everything, right? Talent means you can build your software, you can build your platforms and your apps. You could do that better and faster. You can do that with the right people. And that, again, going back to the thesis for Mob Squad, like having access to amazing people is what drives company growth these days. And that's, I think an important part of why Canada has advantage.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I think the security aspect of things, I mean, and you're not to mention, I mean, I want to move to Canada now. I'm like, hearing hearing all of this that you're speaking about, you never know. Maybe we'll be neighbors. But I know you mentioned kind of the country cap, which kind of leads us into talking about the H-1B lottery. So this year, USCIS received over 330,000 unique beneficiaries for the H-1B lottery. Ultimately, they ended up selecting just over 118,000, which resulted in over 200,000 unique beneficiaries who were not selected in the lottery. How does the Canadian alternative play into these individuals who weren't selected for the lottery?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think this is consistent with numbers we've seen over the last few years, where there are 200,000 to 300,000 unique beneficiaries who enter the lottery and are not selected. That cap of 85,000 a year has been pretty fixed for a long time, and so we see this problem basically every year. Um, how Canada plays into this, I think, in a number of ways. Specifically for Mob Squad, we support a ton of people who weren't selected in the lottery, and this is really falls into two groups, right? So the typical H-1B path, I think most people are one of two folks. They are those who studied in the U.S., then got a STEM OPT visa, which allows them to work in the U.S. for up to 3 years, and every year they enter the lottery. And there's about a 25 to 30% selection chance in any given year, depending on the number of entrants, which means that even if you enter all 3 times, your odds of being selected cumulatively are about 50%. So you're looking at a coin flip, which is not what you want when you're considering where to stay for the long term. Um, the second group are those who entered the lottery from abroad, right? Because you can be in India, you can be in Ukraine, you can be in Brazil, anywhere, and enter the lottery if you have a company that's willing to support you. And they can enter, any number of times, but their odds every time as well are the same, 25-ish%. And so, for Mob Squad specifically, like we love hiring this talent because in the case of the STEM APT holders, they've got a great education that they got from the US. They've got 3 years of working experience, often at top US firms, whether that is, startups and scale ups, or whether that's established, companies like Amazon, Apple, Google. Because it's a lottery, anybody can get, not selected from this. And so, we offer a pathway where we love hiring these types of individuals because they come with great experience and great education. And then they can, basically work for us and provide technical and consulting services to our client base, which is very similar to the types of companies they'd be familiar with. It's startups and scale ups all over North America. Some of them are larger companies, but it's hires across tech roles, all across the spectrum. So software engineers, data scientists, machine learning engineers, AI, cybersecurity, all of that. Um, so that's kind of the Mob Squad answer. For those who are not able or don't necessarily fit what we're looking for, there's tons of Canadian companies looking for great talent. There continues to be a technology talent shortage, and it's especially inexperienced technology talent. Like there are tons of great people coming out of the schools in Canada, but it's really, really hard sometimes to find niche skills or people with 5 years of experience. And so, I would encourage people to apply because of programs like the Global Talent Stream. Canadian companies that are eligible can hire these folks, and they can be in Canada in as little as 6 weeks. And so, we're an example of a company that obviously can help and has helped a lot of these folks stay in North America and actually get on a permanent residency pathway in Canada and become permanent residents. Some of them have even now become citizens because we've been around for so long. But there are others as well that can do, a similar thing just by looking at the opportunities available.
Yeah, I think that 6 week time frame, I'm just sure, is so attractive. Outside of having that waiting game, having the more clear definition of what that time frame could look like, I'm sure is very attractive to people looking to explore Canada. From looking at, we've seen Canada as an H-1B alternative. you've highlighted not only the timeline, the attractive tech talent that we're seeing wanting to go to Canada. If you're looking at the difference between the second Trump administration that we're in now versus his first administration, what are you kind of viewing in terms of the H-1B alternative and the differences between those two administrations?
Yeah, so in some ways, things are very similar regardless of administration, whether that is Trump or otherwise. And the reason I say that is that, as I mentioned earlier, that 85,000 annual cap for the H-1B visa lottery has been a hard cap regardless of administration for a very, very long time. So if you go back to even President Bush, Obama, the first Trump administration, Biden, and Trump now, that number of 85,000 has held constant. And the reason for that is it requires a change. To change that number, it requires passing the House, the Senate, and the presidency. And there's just so much disagreement on what that number should be. There are a lot of people who want it to be higher. There are a lot of people who want it to be lower. And that includes Democrats and Republicans on both sides of that argument. And so it's a really, really difficult number to change. And that's what we've seen, even under, regardless of who's been in the administrative power or who's been in the presidency, that has held the same. And so in some ways, because that number is the same, this is very, very similar in that we still have 200,000 to 300,000 people being not being selected for this lottery in any given year, which creates a very similar problem regardless of who the president is. I would say if you want to look at what has changed, we do see more edge cases right now in the U.S. So, as an example, people being asked for additional requests for evidence in the U.S. in their U.S. visa applications, stalling of approvals, delayed approvals. Some people have been rejected for reasons that they are unsure of why, but either their company is not willing to support an appeal, or they have just decided not to approach an appeal because it's just too difficult and time consuming. Um, and then the other one we see is just sentiment amongst foreign nationals, right? So where people are, as you know, people that are on visas are very, very active on forums. They're all over Reddit. They're all over international kind of visa blogs and things. And when they hear kind of horror stories of people that thought they had a visa and it didn't go through, or were in a routine renewal that ended up taking a year and then they expired, it creates a little more panic and a little more fear in people around what might happen to them, and they view their risk of being able to stay as a lot higher. So, we saw this last time and we're seeing it again, where people that actually have US visas are proactively selecting to come to Canada early just because they don't want to risk their visa being suspended or denied or whatever happens to be before they get their permanent residency. Especially for Indian nationals, because of the country caps, their permanent residency could take 10 years or more. And so we see people proactively choose to come to Canada or elsewhere in scenarios like this, just because they hear of so many cases that are challenging. And so, I'd say that happens more now than we saw before. And it's really valid, and we totally understand it, because people who are worried about their immigration status aren't as productive because they're constantly trying to think about like what they need to do for them and their family. And when that stabilizes, we do see, both mental health improve as well as productivity improve, because they are no longer worried about these different scenarios or things that could happen to them, and they feel, stable. They feel like they have a path that they understand, and that they're not worried is at risk of anything. And so that I would say is probably the biggest change that we see.
Yeah, that I would maybe call that the employee experience part of things, right? Looking out for employees. I guess, Arf, maybe kind of the next question, viewing it from like the HR perspective, if you're speaking directly with someone in the human resources or talent acquisition, what advice would you give to those folks who, want, obviously potentially have employees who are not selected in the H-1B, and maybe looking ahead to next year or 2 years from now, want to be a little bit more proactive when exploring alternatives? What advice would you give, and how would you encourage them to, start to bump Canada up, maybe to the same or maybe even above the H-1B?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a conversation we have a lot, and a question we get asked a lot, both by companies, current and prospective clients, as well as just tech talent in the U.S. trying to think about things. And our advice is always to plan as far ahead as possible. I think you can assume a pathway in the US that makes sense, but it never hurts to have backup conversations and backup plans ready to go. Um, One, because things take time, right? So you don't want to be stuck where your visa expires, or you didn't get renewed for something that you thought was going to happen, and suddenly you have 60 days to figure out a plan. That can be challenging because you now are under the clock and you may make decisions that aren't fully thought out, or just to stabilize things. But the earlier you plan, the better. There's often no cost or no risk with doing so, but it provides tremendous reward. Like for individuals specifically, to have a peace of mind to say, oh, well, if this doesn't work out, if I don't win the H-1B lottery next March or April, I've got a backup plan. So I can already get that peace of mind. And, I know I've been proactive here and I know that I have a solution. It's really, really helpful. And that's the same for companies. Like we encourage companies um, to think about backup options for their people. Um, you know, whether that's Canada or alternatives, it really, really helps their folks know that the company has their back and know that they have solutions in place, so that that peace of mind, that mental health improvement that I mentioned, and frankly, the increased productivity can be reached sooner. And so, obviously, shamelessly, MobSquad does a lot of this and can provide this for a lot of clients as well as individuals. And so, we always encourage the earliest conversations with us. Obviously, we don't charge anything, we don't do anything unless there's an actual need, or if there's a visa situation that requires it. But knowing that you've had the conversation, the contracts have been reviewed, the pricing is done, it provides a stability to the company to say, okay, we know we're not going to, have these issues come up for our folks. And for people, it helps provide them with, knowing that there's a pathway. And so earlier the better, I think, on discussions, just so that there's stability for everyone.
And, highlighting something that you just said is, the path, the risk, and the cost. I think that's something that's really important for HR individuals and mobility individuals who are handling programs, is also what you pointed out is sometimes that path has several offshoots, and understanding and having that clear understanding ahead of time can be really helpful to, ease some of the anxiety that the foreign nationals are maybe going through. So I love that you pointed that out for our listeners.
Yeah, no, it's just it's something that can just be super helpful. That takes a little bit. It's really, really hard to get smart on something when you're under the gun, and you have like a limited window, and you have to make a decision in like 3 weeks. It's way easier to do it when you don't have those pressures, and can rationally think about it. And then when you do get under the gun, you're already ready to go.
Yep, absolutely. um, you know, Speaking to that in terms of, looking at one thing you maybe would want to change in the global tech talent ecosystem, if you could highlight maybe what that would be and why, I think that would be great for our listeners to hear from someone like yourself who's in the weeds daily.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's something we think about a lot, and thought about, even when we were starting and growing Mob Squad. Is one thing I see all the time is just highly skilled, amazing, genius tech talent that are not working to their full potential. And it could be for a ton of reasons, right? Like, I mean, it could just be that they're in a country or location that doesn't allow them to do so because of safety related issues, because of access issues. As I mentioned, a lot of the high growth companies are still concentrated in the US, and there are certain countries that the US either doesn't want to or won't work with, because of IP related issues. And so it just means that there's tremendous talent that are not developing ideas or being used to their full potential. And then a lot of what we just talked about around people that are facing immigration risk are not being utilized to their full potential because there are just other really, really important things on their mind that are taking away from their ability to contribute at their best. And immigration stability is a huge thing because it encompasses where you are, who your network is, what your family can do. Like, so many things are dependent on that. And so, that we see that it's super important. And so, I think there's been a lot of progress on this. Again, as we going back to the beginning, the post-COVID world has definitely unlocked a lot of the world, and unlocked a lot of this potential. But I think there's still a ways to go. I think that there are things that countries can do to better enhance their technology markets. We talked about a number of things that Canada is trying to do, and I think there's a lot that we can continue to do, especially in the AI ML spaces. Um, and that's just one of 100 examples of things that both Canada and other countries can do. Um, And then, I think that there is just situations that we come across all the time where when we see it day to day, you relocate talent from market X to market Y, and the work that they're doing, both the quality of work, but also the productivity of those folks, and the things that they're trusted with just grows exponentially. And the value that's unlocked from that changes dramatically. And you start seeing real innovation, real growth, real productivity. And I think that there's just so much opportunity for that. Like, I think we learned a lot during the pandemic, and a lot of it I think was valuable. And I don't want to lose some of those amazing lessons, and be able to continue down some of that. So it was a crazy and mostly terrible time for most of us. But if we can at least take the learning out of it, at least something will have come from spending 2 years locked inside.
It's hard to believe that that was like basically, I mean, it was 5 years ago. And looking at the calendar, and yeah, how fast time flies. Um, Arf, in light, given obviously our close relationship, in terms of Canada, U.S., and the movement of talent back and forth, how are you and perhaps and other leaders in Mob Squad? How are you guys thinking about your company's role in light of the current environment in the U.S.?
Yeah, I mean, I think the best thing to kind of quote here is there was a piece of the mandate letter that was recently released by the government, where they outlined 7 priorities. And one of those was immigration, which I think shows that it's still a top of mind priority for the government. And it was really around attracting the best talent in the world to help build our economy. Which I think is a really, really interesting line. And, as I mentioned in the platform, there was a specific call out to, those in the US who may not be able to stay, and, bringing them here. And I think we fit really well into that. We want to present a friendly, seamless alternative to those that may be facing challenges in the US, whether that is specifically didn't get selected in the lottery, or an expiring, routine visa, or other challenges, as we mentioned, some of the fear and risk that they might feel just seeing what's going on. We offer really, really, really good solutions that are fast, that are quick, seamless, that can allow people to, achieve their full potential. And we want to help where we can. The thing I'm, really proud of with our team is that they're super supportive and caring, and that they understand what people are going through when they make decisions to either leave their home country or leave the US as a foreign national to resettle in Canada. Often people we hire, it's the first time coming here. And so we want our team to have a lot of empathy, a lot of care, and a lot of support for that, for individuals and the families, because we always know that, you're not just hiring someone, but you're bringing the whole family. And if they're not happy, then nothing really works. And so we would just encourage those that are facing situations to reach out. We'd love to see how we can help, and we think that that's our role here, which I don't think is different from what it's been before. It just might be more emphasized, just given certain circumstances that come up, or certain things that are that are being observed. So I think the fact that we have been doing this for a number of years now helps demonstrate a long track record, and stability, and success there, which again, I know in this space is sometimes challenging. As we talked a little bit about fraud, it does exist, and there are just cases that are made that aren't real. And so I think we want to lean on our stability. We want to lean on our track record, and demonstrate that we can try and do as much as we can for folks that are facing challenging situations in this environment.
Well, on that note, Arf, if employees or perhaps their employers do have questions and want to learn more, what's the best way to do so?
Yeah, the best way, definitely go to our website, just mobsquad.io. There is always a purple button on the right side that says Get Started. And there's just a few scenarios that it runs through depending on your specific circumstance. If you're looking for something brand new, if you've got an expiring visa, like whatever it happens to be, there are all the kind of scenarios laid out there. And you would just click on the one that applies to you, and then we'll get back to you pretty much right away. So yeah, that works for both companies that want to be potential clients, as well as tech folks that are facing challenges from the US or anywhere in the world. So that's generally the best way, so we can kind of triage it and get you in touch with the right person who can help you the best.
Cecily, any other questions from your side?
No, but we really appreciate your time, and are looking forward to everyone's feedback on the episode. And, we might have to have you on for time number 3. We'll have to schedule that for later this year.
That sounds good. As long as people aren't sick of hearing from me, I'm happy to keep coming back.
No one would be sick of that. But Art, before we end things, is there anything else that you have top of mind you want to share? Perhaps weren't able to touch on earlier, or anything like that before we sign off.
I think we're good. I think we did a pretty good broad broad coverage of topics, so nothing else in mind.
Awesome. Well, Arif, it was a pleasure having you on the show today. It's always great to have you on, catch up, and as always, learn more about Canadian immigration, the various pathways. So appreciate the time and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you. You too.